So I'm really excited to be able to introduce you to our audience and to have you do the same for them.
Great.
And so narcissism I find to be an absolutely fascinating topic. And the reason why I don't think it's dark is because I believe that when you understand what it is and what it isn't, and when you have tools, all of a sudden there is a light at the end of the tunnel that you're walking down. And you realize you're not crazy. You're around somebody who's making you believe you are.
Correct. That's beautifully put. And I agree with you. In a way, what it is you're giving, back in the day we would have said a road map. No, I'd like to think of it as GPS. I'm hoping to give people a guide to what they're dealing with, and not in an accusatory, you're bad, I'm good way, but in more of a, this may not be good for me. And the challenge in this space of the narcissism space is so many people invest themselves in, can I get this person to change? Can I be better? Can I do different to pull something different out of them? And it's to say, stop. That's not going to change, right? It's like trying to change the weather. There's nothing you can do to make Chicago warmer in February. It's going to be cold, bundle up, great city, but it's going to be cold.
Okay.
Right?
I want to just go, there was a wake-up call right there. When you're done listening to this episode and you understand what narcissism is and you learn the signs to spot it, takeaway number one is you cannot change the weather in Chicago,
No.
and you cannot change the behavior of a narcissist.
No.
So let's start at the beginning, because people are fascinated by the topic of narcissism. The word is now thrown around all the time. What is the definition of a narcissist?
Okay, so let's get, I even want to go to step 0 from step 1 here, is to say narcissism is not a diagnosis, okay?
Wait, what?
It's not. Everyone's like, don't diagnose people. I'm like, okay. I roll up to someone, I said, if I called you stubborn, would you tell me I'm diagnosing you? They're like, no. If I told you were agreeable, would you tell me I'm diagnosing you? No. Then why are you saying narcissism's a diagnosis when it's not? It is a personality style, just like agreeableness, just like introversion. All of those are personality styles. Nobody's getting themselves all the bee in their bonnet when we say those other things.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
I thought that this was like a diagnosis. See, already I'm learning stuff from you.
So narcissistic personality disorder is a diagnosis, right? Okay, that is.
Okay.
That's a very specific, 3 words, specific. It's like, let me put it this way. No one would get mad at you if you walked up and said, gosh, you're sad. You seem a little depressed. Don't diagnose me. We'd be okay with you saying, oh, you're sad. You seem a little depressed, right?
Yes.
Why? Depressed actually is a kind of a clinical term, right? Depression, it's actually called major depressive disorder, is a diagnosis. That's actually more on point. But this word has got people so worked up. Don't diagnose me. It's interesting. It's a pattern that is rewarded by society, and yet people don't want to be called it. I'm like, pick a lane, folks. So let's start here. It is a personality style. It is a maladaptive style. It is an antagonistic style, but it's a style, no different than any other personality style.
Okay, so just so I make sure that I'm tracking and everybody's tracking. So basically, we've collapsed 2 things when we talk about narcissism in society. There is narcissists and narcissism, which is a personality style that is maladaptive that we all might exhibit at some point.
Nope.
Oh, okay.
No. I got a personality. You got a personality. People listening and watching this, they've got a personality, and that's their personality. I know. For example, Mel, I'm introverted. Okay. Everyone's like, no, you talk so much. Oh, heck no. There was a day the other day where I didn't speak to a single human being and I didn't leave my house. It was the best day of my week. And people are, aren't you sad? And we're going out. I'm like, have fun. Don't call me. Like, we're good. So I am a naturally introverted person. I am never going to be the life of the party. I am never going to want to go to a party. I am not a joiner. And after I spend time with a large group of people, I collapse into bed. Okay.
Yep.
That's my personality. Okay. I've been like that since all my life. All right.
Okay.
And that got shaped. So if that is my personality, some people aren't a little bit introverted. There's an extroverted person. If you've ever spent time with an extroverted person, they actually kind of lose their mind. I don't have plans. Where is everybody? I can't believe I need to be alone. I've worked with clients who are extroverted and they really are upset about that. And as an introverted therapist, for a minute, I was like, what? Like, that sounds like fantasy camp, like 3 days alone. Sign me up, you know,
Right.
but I have to be empathic to this is hard for them.
Yep.
They're exhausted by being alone. I have an incredibly extroverted child. And when she's alone for 6 hours, she actually starts feeling very sad. And that's real. I can't say, don't be ridiculous. Use your time alone. Like, just like if somebody said, don't be ridiculous, Romney, you're at a party, you know, lighten up. It's the same thing. So that's why I'm saying you are what you are. I actually think a lot of people out there don't have narcissistic qualities. So this leads us to, then what is this?
Right.
Personality style.
What is this? So,
It is-
but there's two things, just so I'm tracking that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about narcissism as a personality style.
Yep.
And then narcissistic
Personality
personality
disorder.
disorder,
And
which is a diagnosis.
It's a diagnosis. And you know
Got
what?
it.
I don't even think we should talk about it.
Okay.
Because the fact is, only 1 to maybe 4% of the population has this personality disorder.
Okay.
The vast majority of cases are never diagnosed. And it is I actually think they should get rid of the diagnosis. I think it serves no
Wow.
function whatsoever. I really don't. It's the only diagnosis in the world where having it means you do more harm to other people than to yourself. Most disorders are based on the distress that the person themselves are facing. A person with major depressive disorder is really struggling. A person with generalized anxiety disorder is experiencing distress. Even other personality disorders like borderline personality disorder, these are people who are having a lot of distress. Narcissistic personality disorder, as long as life's going the way they want it to, they are happy as can be. And until something goes wrong, then they make a mess, scream at everyone. And then when it goes back to the way they are, they tend to make more money. They're much more successful. They tend to have more success in dating. So this is a tough diagnosis to give out. Now, let's break down what narcissism is.
Okay, great. So I just want to make sure, because this is such an interesting topic, and obviously there's lots of content out there all over the place, but you are, in my opinion, the world's leading expert on this. And so what you're basically saying is, if we just understand what a narcissistic personality is, that's enough.
Yeah.
Because then you can spot the signs.
Yep.
Then you can learn to protect yourself. And if I'm going to extrapolate what you're saying, you're basically saying the 1 to 4% of people that ever get that diagnosis anyway already have the personality type. So it doesn't matter. It's just blown out of proportion, and they're finally now in therapy. And don't most narcissists don't know they're
go to
narcissists.
therapy. That's the thing. That's what I'm saying. So there's a lot of people out there who may have this quote unquote diagnosis. They're never going to get diagnosed because they're never across the table from a licensed mental health professional who's actually the only person qualified to issue such said diagnosis. And I'm going to be honest with you, even the majority of people who have the disorder, it's never documented anywhere because the insurance company ain't going to pay for therapy for it because you can't do anything about it. So you see what I'm saying?
Hold on. So that was also just, you just said it again. You cannot change the weather in Chicago.
Nope.
And you cannot do anything to change somebody with a narcissistic personality?
Yeah, and let's push this a little bit further, okay? So I'm going to be sort of a provocateur here. Personality is tough. There's different schools of thought on how much personality can change, all right? There's a little wiggle room. And I think the greater a person's flexibility, psychological and personality, the healthier the person is. It's almost like your body. The more flexible you are, likely the more you work it out, the less likely you're going to develop osteoporosis and break bones and all that. Flexibility is everything. But I would say it matters more psychologically than it even means physically, right? That's why people stretch before a workout.
Oh, that's interesting. Because what I'm thinking about right now is there's a pretty famous TED Talk by, I think it's Dr. Schwartz, talking about personality. And what he basically says, and now I'm realizing it's the flexibility you're talking about. He, like you, said, I'm a professor and I am very introverted. But when it matters to me, I can be flexible. I can stand in front of that, that classroom and I can profess. But the second that lecture is over, I collapse.
I'm done. That's it. That's it.
So the flexibility you're talking about is that an extrovert like me can shut up and be alone when it matters. An introvert like you can step in front of the mic, invite people into your home when it matters. But that flexibility is very limited. It's tied to when it's important to you, but then you go back to your baseline. Is that what you're saying?
Always.
As a
And so,
personality?
in fact, there is a theory, and I hope I credit it to the right person. I think it's Campbell is the one who writes about this. The idea of the rubber band theory of personality. And the idea of the rubber band is that we all have our personality. A rubber band's just sitting there in its state. That's who we are. But we can stretch it. Okay, we could stretch it a bit. But when back to baseline or even at times of stress, we go to our baseline personality, right? The challenge is that that person with a narcissistic personality not only has trouble stretching, it's not even the stretching as much as the changing. You see, here's the challenge with the narcissistic personality, which I still haven't described and I'm aware of it.
Sorry.
But the challenge with the narcissistic personality is that it's a very egocentric, self-serving style, right? It's designed to get them what they need. It's what helps them feel safe, what helps them feel happy, with very little regard for anyone else. Other personality styles, agreeableness. In fact, agreeableness is considered the counterweight to narcissism. So narcissism is actually what's called, it's a real personality style is disagreeableness or antagonism, right? So if narcissism's disagreeableness, agreeableness is the other side of that. Agreeable people I love agreeable people. They're the best. Like, I just would like a little commune full of them. We're never going to take over the world and we're not going to make a lot of money, but let me tell you, so fun. Empathic, warm, flexible, make accommodation for other people, follow the rules, highly ethical. That's agreeableness. Opposite of narcissism, right?
So what is narcissism?
So narcissism is a person who has a lack of empathy, and I'm going to talk about, or performative empathy, which I'm going to get to in a minute. Okay, so, but they have inconsistent or low empathy. They're very entitled. They're arrogant. They're egocentric. They're chronically validation and admiration seeking. They need to be in control all the time. They are poorly emotionally regulated, prone to strong shows of rage if they're frustrated or disappointed or aren't getting their way. They're very easily provoked and very thin-skinned. If anyone gives them feedback or criticism, like, "Rah!" They just rage very quickly. They can't regulate themselves at those times. They're very pretentious. They tend to be very superficial. I mean, the list goes. It's that kind of stuff. Now, the core of narcissism is a deep insecurity. And that's the piece we forget. These are not people actually who, at their most primal unconscious level, believe they're hype. All of this stuff is to create almost a suit of armor around that unprocessed insecurity. The narcissistic person is always fighting a battle against shame. And the shame is that at an unconscious level, people are going to see they ain't all that. So if anything even pokes them, that like even someone makes a joke at their expense, they lash out to maintain dominance. Because you also want to know what motivates the narcissistic person. Power, dominance, control, and frankly, safety, because all those things keep them safe. If they're in control, if they're the boss, if they have all the money, then they feel okay. All the power, whatever, the fame, whatever it looks like, then they're okay. That's narcissism. What's tricky about narcissism is there's different, I forgot to also say, they're very grandiose. So they live in a fantasy world. I'm going to have the perfect love story. Look at my perfect life. You can see how social media took this grandiosity and blew it up into something that I've been studying narcissism since before there was social media. And I was like, what the holy hell just happened?
What have you seen?
I mean, what happened was narcissism's always been around. As long as there were human beings. I mean, I'm guessing like Attila the Hun was probably a narcissist. Napoleon might have been a narcissist. I think if you go all the way back in the history books, in fact, when I helped my daughter with all of her ancient and, even modern European history, I'm like, narcissist. And I said, you see how much they shaped history to this day. So I think that it's always been there.
Yeah.
Okay. The difference was back in the day, if you needed validation, okay, you and I are both old enough to know about rotary dial phones and no answering machines and no social media, okay? So there was a time if you needed validation, you actually had to clean up and leave the house.
True.
Right? Like
Yes.
you actually had to get up and go. You couldn't become famous, right? Even if you wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper on some kind of rant, the editor was going to get 100 of these, or they'd get 100 of these and pick one. So there was no public place to do this. So where narcissists really did their dirty work was they would harm the people around them. Very dominant, probably cruel to spouses, cruel to children. I think if you look at family lines of this intergenerationally, they'll say like, yeah, really brutal father, really brutal grandfather, really brutal great grandfather. And it often links to things like hierarchies, patriarchies, like things that are all very, very hierarchical. One person gets the final say, not because they're a good person, but just because. So these systems have always been there. And so what happened though is one day, I remember it so well. I remember the house I was living in. Somebody said to me, have you seen this thing called Facebook? I'm like, Facebook? And I remember what a Facebook was. Facebook was that group of pictures that you'd get in your first year of college. Like that's what it was called where I went to college,
we had one at Dartmouth too.
Yep. So there's a Facebook. And I'm like, what is a college thing? And they're like, no, you need to go check this out. They said, create an account. So I did. And I was like, oh, this is what happened to all those people I went to high school with. Okay. But at the moment, I thought, oh, God, you just write stuff and people like it. What went through my head in that moment? I remember my kids were really small at the time. And the moment sticks in my mind. I thought, this is going to be a disaster. You know, it must have been like being like a pulmonologist or a cardiologist when cigarettes were out. You're like, what is happening? And so at that moment, I thought the game's about to change. I had no idea what was going to come with the Instagram and the influencing and all. I had no idea what was coming there. But I thought, wow, nobody needs to leave the house. They can put forth a false version of themselves, the grandiose version, the fantasy version, and sit at home and let the validation come in. My concern was that this was going to make their narcissistic symptomatology worse overall. And I think that has been borne out.
Wow. So can I ask you a question? Because this is one of the things that really changed my life. When you taught me that narcissists are not born, they're made. What is it? Can you explain that to everybody? Because this is a game changer to understand this.
So nobody's born this way. Okay. I mean,
so
I guess
even in a family structure where you have a grandfather, a father, like these dominant or mother person, you are not born a narcissist.
Everyone listening to this, I will say there are 4 kids in our family, and I have a brother who's narcissistic, and the rest of us are really cool and nice and kind to each other. So I think of how many people out there who have siblings, and like my sister's really kind, and my other sister's really, really narcissistic. So if that was the case, it should appear in all siblings, or at least 50% of them.
So how does it get made?
It's made. So here's the most likely explanation. Is that there may very well be, and this has not been isolated yet, but there may very well be a biological vulnerability to it. And that would be probably delivered through something called a baby's temperament. Temperament is the genetic part of our personality. Anyone who spent time around a baby will know some kids soothe really easily. Some kids are they're easy. They're easy, smiley, friendly babies. They're really sweet kids, right?
Right.
And as they grow up, they stay sweet, and the teachers like them, and they have friends, and they're just sweet, sweet, sweet. Then there are those kids who will not stop crying, and they're demanding. And as they grow up, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. And they're always doing things for attention, and they're disruptive, and they won't sit still. And as they enter preschool and school, the teachers always, sit down, stop that. So they're already starting to get kind of bad vibes from their constant attention-seeking behavior. It's probably an interaction effect. The kid may not be getting enough attention or attachment needs met. So you have this biological vulnerability.
Yep.
In the hands of a skilled, attached, warm, present, loving, consistent parent, that might be manageable. And that sort of energy might get turned into athletic interest or creative interest, and that child won't feel pathologized for their style. But I hate to say it, probably for the majority of kids with that style, it's a lot of stop that, sit down. Can't you be more like your sister? You're going in the corner. You're making a mess. You're going to the principal. So that kid is getting invalidated every time they turn around. That invalidation plus the temperament, plus the possibility that they don't have an environment where there's a possibility for secure attachment, plus the possibility of trauma, chaos, and neglect. That's one pathway to develop a narcissist.
So if I can just make sure I'm understanding, what you're basically saying is, even regardless of temperament, if you're not getting your emotional needs met, if you do not feel safe and secure in your house, if you have a parent that abandons you, a parent that's abusive,
Neglecting you. Yeah.
you know, somebody with mental illness and addiction, somebody who's unpredictable, that you as a child don't feel safe or you don't feel seen, all those emotional needs, and that's what leads to narcissism?
But not always. In fact, I wouldn't say the vast majority of the time. Many people grew up in situations like that, of trauma, of neglect, of abuse, of chaos. And they do not go on to become narcissistic. They typically go on to become rather anxious adults with poor self-appraisal, who don't know their value and worth, a whole nother different burden to carry. But the narcissist... No, I was actually talking about myself, my dear. So yeah, that's all me. You know, so it's a... but at the end of it, what we see is that it's still... The problem is that these paths aren't linear. I always say narcissism is a story, the development of narcissism is a story we can tell backwards, but never forwards.
Oh.
So if I'm thinking, I have some clients who have been through horrific early childhood trauma, horrific, physical abuse, sexual abuse, violence. They grew up in chaos. To tell you that these are some of the most empathic, loving human beings I've ever met would be actually missing the mark. They're just solid people. If anything, they don't understand their value. Like their harm is very internalized. It's like, I'm not good enough, I'm not doing enough, but there's so much goodness, so much empathy. They've gone on to become amazing parents, all of that, right? So that early chaos does not damn someone by a long shot, but it does set up these what are called adverse childhood experiences. It definitely, if we view this from a probability standpoint, there's more negative outcomes that could come, either internalized, disliking oneself, or externalized, and that's more of what narcissism could potentially look like. Now, there's a secondary path to narcissism.
Okay.
And that secondary path is actually one we probably should be monitoring in modern times quite a bit, which is the overindulged child. The child who gets whatever they want. Money is spent on them lavishly. You're so great. You're so smart. There was a study done out of Amsterdam. Now, it'll be interesting to see what happens when these kids turn into adults. He was studying children. But what he found, this guy, I think his name was Eddie Brummelmans at the University of Amsterdam, and what he found was that children who were told they are more special than other children, those were the kids that were already showing entitlement and other sort of soft signs of narcissism. So it's not that you're telling your child they're special. It's that you're more special than somebody else.
Oh.
That was the penny drop moment, which is very much what you could imagine a more narcissistic parent doing. My child is more special than the other children. My child deserves special treatment. My child should play the whole game. My child should get this. My child should get that. But you're looking at kids where they're not taught there's three critical things I'd say every child needs.
Okay, so there's three critical things every child needs.
Secure attachment.
So explain it. Secure attachment.
Secure attachment happens when a child has at least one primary caregiver that is consistently available, that the child feels that they can call that caregiver when they need them, that secure attachment develops over the early years. And we're talking birth to like 2 or 3. This is something where you got to lock this in early, right? That securely attached child, in those early experiments done by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, sort of seminal work in the field, what they found was that the child who was securely attached, when mom would leave them in a strange situation, that would be preschool or babysitter or something like that, the child would whimper a little, like, where are you going? But then they would actually calm down very quickly with the soothing of a caregiver. And then when the parent came back to pick them up, the child would be thrilled to see them. In children who are more anxiously or avoidantly or insecurely attached, there would be almost difficult to soothe when at the point the parent came back, and more importantly, when the parent left. So they'd be difficult to soothe when the parent left, and when the parent came back, the child would actually either go into absolutely like another meltdown, almost like, how could you leave me? Or they'd turn their head away from the parent. You see, whereas that securely attached child would actually be happy to see the parent when they returned. See?
Okay.
So now that secure attachment is number one, and that's created by consistency and availability in that early environment. You need one parent doing that and one primary caregiver, to be honest. It's anyone, whoever that child identifies as such. Number two is that children need to learn how to soothe themselves, and they need to learn how to be disappointed. Okay. And we're not letting them do that. Like sometimes you fail. Sometimes you don't get the teacher you want. Sometimes they run out of chocolate ice cream by the time you get up. And you know what? Sometimes you lose at Chutes and Ladders. I remember like saying, I'm going to win this game. And the other people are like, don't let them win. I ain't going to let them win. I'm getting up to the top of the Chutes and Ladders and I'm going to win. And I'm saying, wow, that felt good. And when my daughter said, that's not fair, I said, oh, ho, ho, ho. I won this game. Let's be present with me winning. You want to play again? Sure, we can do that again. But you need to learn to be present, that not every outcome is the way you're going to want it to be. That's number 2. Number 3 is empathy. You've got to foster empathy in children and foster compassion. That can be through books they read, stories they experience, sure, but above all else, in the home. How do they learn that? It's modeled for them. They see parents empathizing or caregivers empathizing with each other. They see extended family empathizing with each other. They see empathy in the classroom. They see empathy in the world. And you can imagine a child who sees none of that, or the parent is acting in a very entitled manner, like, oh, let's just go to the head of the line. We're more important than these people. Or, oh, gosh, we're not sitting in that line. All these things parents do that they think are innocuous in an airport, at a soccer game, at a theme park. Your kid's learning, and their brain is just an explosion of neurons and dendrites, and that's getting filed away under we're special.
The reason why this is so interesting to me is because I think one of the challenges when you have either a narcissistic parent or sibling or boss or somebody that you're in a relationship with is that you think that somehow everything is your fault.
Yes.
And when I learned from you that narcissists are made in childhood, it just opened up this door for me to go, oh, wow. So they didn't choose to be this way. They're not consciously doing this.
It's what it is. It's a regulation issue, right? So it's the sense that a narcissistic person never quite feels safe in the world. Right? Because they never feel safe, they're always on the offense and the defense simultaneously, right? I'm going to win. I'm going to dominate. Me. And are you looking at me? You're looking at me? And then rage. So that constant offense-defense that they play makes them very antagonistic unless things are going exactly the way they want. And where narcissistic people are tricky is that if they feel safe, I got to tell you, it might be one of the most engaging, entrancing, exhilarating, charismatic, charming experiences you've ever had. They've hung the moon. They've hung the sun only for you. It's dopamine. Okay?
It's literally a Jekyll and Hyde experience.
Really, it is. But then at a time they don't feel safe or they're bored, it's over. And people will spend their lives trying to get back to that hung the sun, hung the moon kind of a moment. And if they really don't have any more use for you anymore, then that's it. You ain't going to feel that again.
So, Dr. Ramani, I'm so excited to be here with you.
Narcissism is not a diagnosis. Okay?
Wait, what?
The core of narcissism is a deep insecurity.
You're not crazy. You're around somebody who's making you believe you are.